name's Craig Schulz. I am Director of External Affairs for the Gateway Program at Amtrak. I'm very happy to be back here at InfraDay today. Ken, thank you again for having us, and I'm happy to be here with my colleagues who will meet in just a second. I'm going to talk a little bit about, we're going to talk today about building in and around the railroad, actually a topic that, I think can be of some benefit to folks in this room to make projects that you all are looking to build happen more smoothly, and to better facilitate that coordination, cooperation with Amtrak. So want to give you some sort of tips and advice and thoughts on kind of how to best go about doing that for your sake and our sake. So first, just a little bit of context. I'll be brief here. Obviously, we're here in New York, the Northeast Corridor. Amtrak owns the majority of the 457-mile Northeast Corridor. That is not true of our national network, which I'll talk about in just a second, but significant because, here on the Northeast Corridor, we work with many commuter operators, of course, New Jersey Transit and Long Island Railroad here, but also the MARC service in Maryland, and SEPTA in the Philadelphia area, and they run far more trains than we do. We are the sort of end-to-end operator of the corridor, but the commuter operators, the commuter services, run far more frequent services than we do, and are often a major factor when it comes to planning and thinking about projects in and around the railroad. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. We ourselves have a number of big, huge, we and our railroad partners have a number of big, huge capital projects happening up and down the corridor, of course. If you took the train in this morning and saw Portal North Bridge, it is a marvel. If you haven't, I would recommend just take the train to Newark. It's worth it. Just take a 20-minute ride, look out the right. But we have lots of work going on up and down the corridor, but that's not really necessarily the focus of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about sort of just those really more sort of routine, run-of-the-mill kinds of projects as well that require a lot of work with Amtrak. I mentioned on the corridor, we own a lot of the infrastructure. That is not necessarily true. It's not true really around most of our network. Outside of the NEC, our trains operate over railroad infrastructure owned by the freight railroads in most cases. So a little bit of a different dynamic for projects and interactions with the railroad outside of the NEC. Obviously the property ownership is a significant factor in sort of how we all work together. And then finally, I just wanted to sort of highlight this because I was here during this, and I think this is a really good example of sort of like a project that kind of illustrates all the different sort of coordination points around Amtrak. So if you're familiar with Manhattan and the Northeast Corridor, used to be back in the day that when this picture was taken, you would come in on the Northeast Corridor, take the train through the tunnel, it'd be dark, and then you'd come in, it'd be light for about 2 seconds, and then it'd get dark again. You sort of knew when you got to that light part that, like, okay, the station is right here. That was this. And a few years ago, we began an overbuild project. This is between 9th and 10th Avenue on the west side of Manhattan. We began this overbuild project that basically put a giant platform above the Northeast Corridor. And you can see, it's maybe a little hard to see, but in some of these things here, here's the railroad right down underneath here, and you see these giant platforms, all kinds of catenary wires, all types of infrastructure that had to be accounted for. And this is what it looks like today. These two giant skyscrapers basically on top of the railroad. So that is the Manhattan West project. It's a great project. If you live or if you work in Moynihan, we get to sort of, take advantage of this all the time. Not really the focus of our discussion here today, but it is a project that I thought sort of illustrates some of the complexities around when you're working in and around the railroad, some of the things that we have to sort of think about. So that is what we're going to talk about. I guess I'm going to leave this up here. And I'm going to turn to the panel. See if this works. Nice. Look at that. Okay. So I'm going to sit down here. Lovely. Here with my colleagues, Paul Jones, Jessica Goldstein, and Purvesh Shah. I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves, and then we'll get into our discussion here a little bit about how to work in and around the railroad. So, Paul, maybe I'll start with you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Paul Jones. I'm the Director of Infrastructure Delivery for the New York Division, which includes New York and New Jersey. One of my duties is I provide construction management services for third-party development and inspection around the division, which includes up to New Rochelle, as well as west side of Manhattan, up to Pelham Bay Bridge. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jessica Goldstein. Before you get to that phase of construction management, you likely need an agreement or a permit from Amtrak. So I'm the Senior Director of External Partnerships. What our team does is we develop and issue those agreements for design and construction or a permit that you're going to need in order to have Amtrak review your design work, provide force account, and construction management services in order to get out there in the field and complete your project.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Purvesh Shah. I'm the Director of Infrastructure and Operations Planning at Amtrak. If any of you are planning to start a project, whether it's a station project, whether you are a commuter operator and want to do a sole benefit project, it all starts from planning. And my group at Amtrak, either starts the planning phase or reviews the work done by other agencies all the way through preliminary engineering and final design. And we make sure that planning is done really well, because if you don't plan well, you must plan to fail. So
thank you all. So thank you all for agreeing to this conversation here. So, Purvesh, I'm going to start with you, actually. And while I said we weren't really necessarily going to talk about Manhattan West, I am going to ask you this one question. We talked about this. So if you could maybe, I think it's a good way to kind of give folks an example of the importance, like you were just saying, of thinking ahead and planning. If you could maybe talk a little bit about sort of the interface, like the track layout there west of Penn Station, and sort of, this Manhattan West project began in the 2010s, but it had to sort of think ahead in terms of the tunnel, right? So can you maybe talk about some of those considerations?
Absolutely. So most people in this room may know that in the year 2010, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie canceled the ARC program. Amtrak then picked up the pieces of the ARC program, and just in about 2011 or so, the developers approached Amtrak that they wanted to build Manhattan West and Hudson Yards. We immediately sprung into action, and we had to make sure that all these massive buildings and their columns that would subsequently go down, they are placed in a way that would not preclude the future connection coming from the new Hudson Tunnel project, which is right now in construction. So to Craig's point, we had to lay out all the track plans to a good, reasonable engineering level that we could stand on and provide it to the developers to ensure that our path, our quote-unquote right-of-way is preserved, not just through Hudson Yards, but also through Manhattan West. The point I'm trying to make here is that it's a very proactive work that we, partnering with the industry, have to always be on top of that, because had we not done that level of analysis and we didn't have that level of foresight, some of the things or many of the things that you are going to be seeing for Hudson Tunnel project being, I'm confident that it will be built and it will be open for service in the year 2034, 35. Those would not have been possible. So that's one of the points I wanted to highlight.
Yeah, no, thank you, Purvesh. And so then kind of moving forward in the stages of the project, maybe Paul, could you talk a little bit about just, give folks some context for just like the challenges of working in and around the railroad, right? And kind of like all the things to think through.
Absolutely. So before I started with project and construction management, I was in operations, and the first thing you say is safety is of the utmost importance in the discharge of duty. Well, it's the same in construction management. So, Amtrak, the two distinct features of this environment that provides challenges. We have catenary, which is 12,500 volts down here in New York, 25,000 volts up in New England. And it can kill you, right? And also we have trains, unlike, class 4, which run at 80, we go up to 135 in mid-Jersey and up to Hellgate 85. So, equipment speeds and electricity, and how do you work around those to effectively construct? And we have processes in place. The first process that we have in place is what's called a site-specific safety work plan, and most contractors are used to dealing with quality work plans or construction work plans. Well, this incorporates both, and it just takes it a step above, and it's really activity-specific in the schedule, and it really ensures it ensures the safety of not just the operating our operating trains and the public at large, but the contractors as well. I always say it protects everybody here. Most people are not used to dealing with this type of document, and it needs internal approval. But one thing that my group does is we help facilitate efficient and effective approvals of it, like quick approvals, so that you can progress your construction. Because again, internally, a lot of people are focused on running a railroad, not third-party construction. And it's my job to kind of bridge that gap and, do both at the same time.
Yes, which is not an easy thing to do. I mean, I will say on your behalf. So, Jess, maybe you could talk a little bit about sort of building on what Paul was saying. I mean, some of the agreements that your team puts together to, number one, I guess, yeah, just sort of maybe I'll just leave it at that. Talk a little bit about some of the agreements, some of the things that folks need to think through on the real estate front, on the legal front. I mean, a lot of considerations there that your team helps folks navigate.
Sure. Thanks, Greg. So much of it depends on what type of work you're looking to perform on the railroad. But regardless of the type, I think we touched on early coordination. You don't want to be applying for something with the goal of getting out there next week. We all want to be sort of realistic in our expectations. We want to get you out there and getting the work done as quickly as possible. But it's really important to budget for the time in your schedule for your project. If you're looking to do work on our railroad that's inspections or surveying or other sort of non-intrusive work, maybe painting, that kind of thing, you can go directly to apply for a permit. In the last year or so, since we've stood up this external partnership team, we're trying to create more visibility into the process for third parties. And so we have launched a page for our website for our permit process, which will walk you through the steps to go about getting a permit. And that permit then, once you have that in place, you'll coordinate with Paul's team to actually get out there in the field. We're doing a lot of work to get you out there sooner, but much of it also comes down to the third-party application, providing us with as much detail as possible as part of your application, using careful means and methods to limit your impact to the railroad, to minimize the costs associated with force account, and creating more availability for you to get out there in the field faster. But if you're doing work that is actual construction work, is intrusive, like sampling or environmental work, or will have design documents developed, there is a more complex process which requires an agreement. So we have two major types of agreements, and those are for design and construction. And design review agreements are very often needed for the construction work you're doing. And what that agreement allows is for Amtrak to review the design to assess the impacts on our facilities and operations and make sure, to Purvesh's earlier point, that you're not precluding any future work. And so once you have the design review agreement in place, only then will Amtrak start the design. We work as quickly as we can, but you need to allow time in your schedule, first for the development of the design review agreement, which includes your design consultant signing off, providing insurance, making payments to Amtrak. And then once that's executed, we turn it over to our engineering team, who will review the designs and provide comments. There may be additional revisions required to your design documents to finalize those before you can move over to construction. So we want you to account for that process as well as the time that that will take. And just to move into the increased visibility, within the next month, by early January 2025, we'll be launching another website that will talk about the different types of third-party agreements. We're also going to have a third-party application portal where you can go on and submit an application electronically for a permit or for any of these types of agreements, and you'll be able to monitor the status as well as the tasks that you have to perform. One thing I just want to mention, because I know there's a lot of consultants in the room, is is who the applicant needs to be. So for a permit, we often have the applicant as the consultant performing work on behalf of the project sponsor. That could be a private entity, or that could be a commuter railroad, or another public entity. But for a design agreement or a construction agreement, that agreement needs to be between Amtrak and the project sponsor itself. And so that's something that I don't think everyone is familiar with. And I just want to sort of provide that clarity so that if you're doing work on behalf of a project sponsor, they are aware that they are the ones who will need to apply for and enter into that agreement. And it's very similar for real estate agreements. I think Louis Wolfowitz is here. He talked earlier. But part of doing business with the railroad on a project particularly like Manhattan West is making sure that you've secured the appropriate real estate rights that you need, again, well in advance, because all of these things take time, and we want to set you up for success to get you out there as soon as possible to complete your work.
And I was going to say, we work in tandem together. We don't work in silos, so we work as a team to help deliver these projects.
So thank you. That was a lot of really good, useful information. And if you are interested, you should definitely check out the website. The page on our website already has a lot of really good information on the permitting process. And I'm sure Jess will have even more good stuff to come here. I mean, she's been doing a great job in sort of moving our processes forward on this. So I want to sort of shift gears a little bit and just kind of move forward in the project a little bit, let's say. And, as we're moving past permitting and got into construction now, I want to talk a little bit about track outages and sort of the precious commodity that track outages are. And Purvesh, maybe I'll start with you and just kind of talk, sort of generally about how important track outages are to the railroad and why they are so important,
So, track outages, it touches, what Paul said, safety, right? Certainly, we want our construction workers to be safe. And whether it's Amtrak's force account or the third-party contractors' workers, you want them to be in a safe area while they are doing the construction work. And often that requires, depending upon the severity of the work, it requires track outages. And I'll step back a little bit and start with the fundamental premise of the Northeast Corridor. Northeast Corridor is not just Amtrak's asset. It is not just the Northeast's asset. It is America's asset. It is providing 20% of the country's GDP. It's a staggering amount if you think about it. And so we still need to operate trains as Amtrak, but also our commuter railroad partners need to operate their trains. As much as folks here in the room and our people who want to build something, they have good intentions in mind, but we often tend to forget that trains still need to operate. They need to still go from one place to another. And so it is really important that if you have a project, not only that the design reviews and agreements and the construction agreements to echo what Jessica just mentioned, they are executed well in advance, but also the necessary consideration and discussion with respect to track outages is put forth. I want to give an example, which, or maybe I should hold off.
That's okay, good.
All right. There used to be a time where, a lot of Amtrak Northeast Corridor construction used to be like day-to-day survivals, right? Way back in the past, it was just maintaining the railroad that we have. Now we are embarking in an era where so many big projects, complicated projects, in addition to the state of good repair renewals are going on. And laying out one layer, second layer, third layer, fourth layer of all these projects on top of each other. And, you may be you as a design consultant or you as a construction contractors may be only invested in thinking about your project, and that's understandable. But we as a railroad and our railroad commuter partners who use our railroad, we have to think about all these projects up and down the corridor and see how they align with each other and how the trains will circumvent and navigate with each other. Right now, we have Penn Station Access project going on in the Bronx, in the Southeast Bronx. Some of you may have seen. We have Portal North Bridge going on, and we have, in the near future, we have a big catenary renewal project coming up in New Jersey between Princeton Junction and Trenton, the Clark to Ham catenary renewal. And some may say, oh, Clark to Ham, it's 40 miles out. Forget about it. I mean, your project is somewhere in central Jersey or northern Jersey. But here's the big kicker. For each of these projects, it's one thing to schedule trains along with the track outages for one project. But then once you start layering off multiple projects, trains are now completely out of the slot where they need to be. A certain track is out of service because certain construction project is already going on. And our Acela trains, for example, you cannot stop them at the drop of a dime. An Acela train operating at 160 miles an hour will take 15,822 feet. That's more than 3 miles to stop. It's going 2 zip codes from here, right? Or maybe 3 in Manhattan. So we have to be very cognizant of all these issues that our schedulers and our operations planners face when trying to schedule outages and also still operate the trains. So please be mindful of all these serious challenges it's not just one project, but multiple ones going on, and what their impacts are going to be.
I think, so
I was just going to say to add to that, I want to stress again, this is why the early application and early coordination is so critical, as well as the flexibility you can bring. So knowing that we have a tremendous amount of capital work and extensive outages planned, think about where you can piggyback on an existing outage. Think about how you can structure your work so that it doesn't require an outage. And when you're applying to do work on the railroad, let us know if you're going to need outages as soon as possible so we can put those requests in to coordinate with all of this other work that we have planned.
And I was just going to follow up and say it's my team's job to make it easier for you, right, to help coordinate these outages so you don't have to know every detail. But the more information we get up front, the more successful your project will be on the latter end.
And I was just going to follow up actually and ask you, Paul, to talk a little bit about, Purvesh mentioned the Penn Station Access project, and I think there's a good example, a good story to be told there about how we have been able to secure more track working time there, correct? Like there's some innovative types of things we've done with contractors, and your team has been pretty intimately involved in that, right?
So prior to this position, I was the director of Penn Station Access in the earlier stages, and really it was how to construct while running trains at the same time, right? There's only 2 tracks up on the Hellgate, from CP 216 down to the skate interlocking right there. So what we came up, the first key to success are engineering controls. So on equipment where you can use heavy operating equipment, but you don't need foul time. And that's basically a lock on a boom, right? So a lock is an engineering control, and it assures that the equipment will not foul the track at any point in time. What does that equate to? That equates to less force account protection that Jessica just spoke about. What does that equate to? Lower costs, right? So that's just one aspect of it. Also, means and method. We talked about this yesterday, like constructability, means and methods. Can you erect a barrier so that you have no potential to foul our tracks with running trains, right? So these, and again, we don't we're here to help, right? My team, I'm not resourced to help every contract. Right now, I'll just give you an example. At this point in time, I have about 15 active third-party contractors working in the New York area alone, not just Jersey. So we're not resourced to meet every day with a contractor, but we're here to help, right? And so we will answer questions. And, my team and Jessica as well, especially best, we can utilize past construction experiences to help new construction. And it's not just construction. Some of you are from the state here. We also provide protection for inspection services where you need a high lift to go up in over our track. So, those are just some of the things you learn from working on these larger projects that you can help equate to, mid-level, smaller, larger, in essence, money-wise, they're different, but, process-wise, it's pretty much the same procedure. So.
We have just a few minutes left. So maybe just a last word here. Jess, I'll start with you. Advice, just sort of general advice for folks. I think we've given a lot of sort of specifics, but maybe just kind of, some of your takeaways, some things that you'd like people to remember as they, think about how to interact with Amtrak, and what they can do to ensure success for their projects.
Thanks, Greg. I think the main thing you can do is reach out to us as soon as possible with the scope of work that you're looking to perform, and ask what type of agreement you need, rather than just assuming that you need one or the other type. So we have an email address. It's jointprojects@amtrak.com. If you're looking to do a third-party project on or around the railroad that's above, below, adjacent to, anything that can impact our operations or on our property, reach out to us with your scope of work, and we will let you know whether you need a design agreement, a construction agreement, or whether you can apply directly for a permit. Our permit applications are online. And as I said earlier, our agreements applications will be online in the next year. And once you've identified the correct type of agreement, submit it as soon as possible with all of the information. We do a lot of work behind the scenes to coordinate with stakeholders like Purvesh and Paul. And so allow for that time in your process, as well as the time it will take to prepare and obtain approval for your site safety specific work plan, so that you're ready to go out in the field.
You want to add to that at all?
Sure. I would advise that don't expect to come onto Amtrak's property and be able to work without any type of protection. Like I said, we have 12,500 volts and trains that go 100 plus miles an hour. So we'll work with you to establish the adequate, I will say, some people think minimum, but it's the adequate protection to keep all involved safe. But again, as I said, once you get the PTE, my team's here to help. It's a collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. Purvesh, we have like a minute left. So anything you want to add here?
Plan. Plan it well, and you will succeed.
Yeah. I will just close and just say, I think first off, hats off to the folks up here on the stage. Especially like Jess and Paul's team have worked very, very closely together. Teams work very closely together. And like I said, they have been working really hard to improve this process. I know that working with Amtrak and working with railroads generally isn't always the easiest thing to do, but I just want to emphasize something Paul said, really all of our panelists said, and it really, like, our concerns and our focus really is on safety. We want to make sure that you are safe on the railroad. We want to make sure that the trains that are operating continue to operate safely. So, bring your patients with us, with you. Come to us early, and we'll be happy to work with you to get your projects done. So with that, thank you, Ken. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.